Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you today. So the one thing that we can probably all agree on globally is that change is here, change happens, and the rate of change is increasing and continuing to increase rapidly, whether it's technological change, business model change, geopolitical change. And looking at all of that, how does that tie together and how does it impact our role as security leaders? So first, going into a little bit about myself. So I am the CISO at Elastic currently. I've been in the security risk space for over 25 years and have worked in financial services, consumer electronics, a number of different startups, and have had a very broad example of lots of different challenges, lots of different issues, worn many hats in my career, and really understand the differences that technology can add in businesses and how you can integrate security into that. I'm looking to share some of that today with you. So we've never been here before. For those of you that know Thomas Friedman, originally he wrote the book, The World is Flat. And this is from an opinion piece he wrote for the New York Times in 2022, where he was really starting to talk about the culmination of change for all of those factors that are coming together and putting us in a place that in history, we've never been here before. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't have anything in the past that can help us anticipate. So how do we move forward in a world where we're not entirely sure what's going to happen next? Diving into that a little bit more, that change from a technological perspective is largely rooted in, first, digitization, which I try not to say that word too fast. And that's your standard, taking all of your analog data, making it digital, creating massive amounts of data. But then what do you do with that data? So then moving into digitalization, automation, taking that data, applying it to business processes, changing how you interact with your customers, changing how you drive your business, and then combine that together with geopolitical change and some of the localization, deglobalization activities, data sovereignty that we see. Again, how do all of those tie together? And we saw that really start to come together with the pandemic, and numerous interactions, processes immediately had to go to a digitized approach. So anything that was planned was suddenly top priority. Anything talking about creating new business models, trying to find out how to survive, how to operate in a pandemic world for those industries that were heavily hit. And a study by McKinsey showed that largely, about 3 to 4 years, the acceleration increased, and some industries, from a pure digitalization perspective, that speed increased things by 7 years. So things that we were anticipating to really be state-of-the-art and normal in our lives 7 to 10 years out happened today due to the pandemic. And why did all this change happen? Because we removed the barrier. There was priority. There wasn't anything else that anyone needed to focus on. And what's fascinating, similar with the McKinsey study, is that looking at the plans, so all of these capabilities that companies were looking at, so remote work, collaboration, more online capabilities for customers to either purchase or interact, number of different technologies, delivery, more on data security. The rapid increase, so things that were supposed to take 400, 500, 600 days from a plan perspective took at most 43 or largely less than a month. And so one, we know we can move quickly if we have the business priority and we have the focus, but also how do we adapt to this change? And coming out of the pandemic, a lot of these changes are here to stay. First and foremost, just the ability to interact online, to interact through chat, to do research, look at everything online before having to interact with the person, and ideally may not even want to interact with the person and just do everything online and then have it delivered to your door. Remote work continues, all the debates of in-office, fully remote, hybrid. We're going to have some type of conversation about that moving forward. We know we're not going to go back to everyone in the office. And then hiring managers. One of the key things is being able to identify and hire talent where it's located versus either having to relocate folks or only hire within the geographical area that you are located. And that has really opened up more skills, skill growth, allowing more folks to get jobs when they can't relocate due to particular circumstances in their lives. So all of that change, all of that change that sped up, that 7 to 10 years, creates data, massive amounts of data. So from this chart, this shows the increase in data over the years, starts in 2010, ends in 2025. And you see a little jump there in the middle from 41 to 64. That's the spike from the pandemic. And what this is showing here, we're going to continue to create massive amounts of data, estimating about 180 zettabytes in 2025, which is a billion terabytes. And that's a lot of data. The interesting thing is 90% of that data is replicated data. Only 10% of it is new. So just think about in your organizations, all the data that you have sitting around and how many copies of data that you have, whether in archives or different systems using the same data, but it's replicated all throughout the environment. If you're in the cloud, what are your data storage costs? What are your data transfer costs? So just understanding how we're using our data is a key part of this as well. And then if you wanted to download all of the data on the internet, that would take you 181 million years. So we can all go home and start doing that. So coming back to how does this work together from a security perspective. So we have digitization, creating massive amounts of data, digitalization accelerated by the pandemic, bringing processes online, bringing business processes into a more digital space, and then all of that combined together, creating the digital transformation. Many of your organizations may be in the middle of or talking about or winding down digital transformation projects, which is often moving to DevOps models, moving into cloud, whether that's a hybrid cloud or moving completely into the cloud environment. And how does that then tie in? Many, many opportunities across all industries. And there's a few examples here from some of the things that really have come to be focused on in the last several years. But at the end of the day, this is creating continued more data, more devices. I was calculating as I was walking over here, I have my laptop, I have my phone, I have my tablet, I have my Kindle, I have my Whoop biometric data. Everyone's wandering around with many, many devices, many, many data points that are being captured. More integrations. As we're looking more into cloud digital environments, data is going in different places. And how do you get that data is the integrations. So those integration points are weak points and things to pay attention to. And then looking holistically, just the attack surface. You have a highly complex attack surface now to understand and to protect. And automation is one of the key ways that we're going to bring that together. So going back to the original three, we had the digitalization and automation. So things that we're doing today have scaled well beyond what humans are able to do. More data that we can process to find useful trends and data points in that to make business decisions. And just the ability to be efficient and move quickly and sometimes even make decisions. And so from a security perspective, we are always pressed to do more with less, shortage of skilled workers, shortage of budget. How do we do more with either the resources that we have or the technology that we have? And using the digitization, it gives us the capability to use the power of data to understand more and more what is happening in our environment and change our mindset from a security perspective and how we approach bringing all that together. So overall, looking at this, a bit of a paradigm shift on driving data and artificial intelligence and automation from a security perspective and bringing all of that together to improve our capabilities from a security perspective and change our mindsets from how we have been thinking about security traditionally and how we move forward. The change will continue. It's not going to stop. And so some of the types of automation that we're looking at is assisted intelligence, like the chatbots and things, repeatable tasks, a lot of SOC, Security Operations Center, level 1 tasks, those that are very repeatable, very standard. Then we're moving into augmented intelligence, and that's using the algorithms to analyze your data, looking across all of your data to identify threats or identify patterns where you might see that there's an anomalous trend happening that you want to investigate, whether that's something malicious or just an operational blip that you want to investigate. The ability to find those patterns is what's important and something that we can't do. So a couple examples, large banks are using the augmented analytics to analyze their data, optimize targets, look for fraud. They've been doing that for many, many years. But the ability has become much less expensive and much more available to many other industries. And then the ride-sharing companies are using it frequently just to understand how you're tying in riders and patterns. And then with the autonomous intelligence, thinking not so much on its own, but being more proactive. The key example here is all the social media sites and the algorithms and what they're feeding into your user feed to keep you there. TikTok being primary example. So all of this creates a world where decentralization is the new norm. Decentralization, whether that is a business model going decentralized, a culture, countries. So more and more, we're being spread out and we're being isolated. And a few examples, we've got decentralized finance, a lot of activities going on there. What's the impact going to be overall? What's the impact from a security perspective of where's that data? How do you know where your data is if it's distributed out through many organizations? Streaming services, many different streaming services, content all over the place. How do you know where to watch? And then also open source. If you look at the open source development community, that's a decentralized development process. It's a decentralized integration supply chain process. And then we also have the geopolitical changes. So a lot of talk on data sovereignty, localization or deglobalization, how you want to look at it. And how does that then impact? You have a global threat environment that you need to account for and you need to protect your organizations from. And then you have very specific requirements to keep data in country. Data needs to stay in very specific locations. And so how do you balance those conflicting goals and purposes? And then adding in privacy, a number of privacy requirements coming in, many countries having their own privacy regulations, and the US starting to get on board with a few of those. So a lot of context, a lot of change. If you think back to 2019, things that you did, how you operated compared to today, completely different. And that's not going to change. That's just going to increase. So from a security perspective and a security leader perspective, the shift is to, we've been talking about for many years that the CISO role needs to focus more on the business. It's much more of a business enabler. And we've hit the point where that is the reality. To be effective as a CISO, it's really needing to partner with the business, understand what business goals and objectives are, and understand how the security program can help that be successful, help the organization meet the goals, and doing so in a way that's both embedded in the culture, but also not seen as much as just a cost center. Because so many organizations, tying back to the digitalization, every company is a technology company today. And so having your core business processes and things that happen to that drive revenue, so any systems impact, malware impact, would have a direct result on the revenue. So from a security leader perspective, how do you tie all that in? And focusing on enterprise risks, product security risk, and your talent acquisition. And it's not easy. We're not making it easy for ourselves. So I look at this, nice, good, 6 things. Think back about 15, 20 years. This was the role of a CISO, what you were focused on, could handle it. Then you look at this. This is the CISO mind map, if you haven't seen it. Cobalt has put it out, and it's just all the different areas. So suddenly a CISO needs to be technical, needs to be a business leader, needs to be a lawyer to help understand security requirements and contracts and privacy requirements, needs to be a resilience lead to understand how do we keep all of this going, needs to understand finance. So how do you find all of that in one person? You don't, but also what does that mean from a leader role into how you split your time, how you focus, and how you put things together. And the world's not getting any easier. So cybercrime continues to increase and more consumer friendly, I think is the best way to describe it. And that you don't have to be highly technical. You have ransomware as a service. You have DOS as a service. You can just go use some Bitcoin and buy a whole bunch of phishing campaigns and suddenly gain access. And all you did was send an email. And then the threats continue to evolve. So a couple of key threats looking at 2030. So you look at 1 and 2, those are the things that we're looking at now, supply chain, disinformation. I think it's going to be a tremendous focus going forward and what that means for the security community. But then you're getting into a lot of the human, the physical, digital. So we're starting to see more and more the impact of, if there's a digital event, creating physical impacts. So if you think of, from a US perspective, the Colonial Pipeline. So a ransomware campaign that took out pipeline and fuel flowing. Suddenly, a good portion of the northeast of the United States could not get gas. So that impacted a plant that was creating parts for cars. They didn't have the gas to drive the fuel to get it over to the cars. So one of the major car manufacturers had delays in inventory due to a ransomware campaign at a pipeline company. Getting into space is one. Some folks, depending on industry, are already working on space. But as more is happening up there, that'll be interesting. And artificial intelligence, a lot of organizations are probably talking about that. But the data is still going to increase. The devices are still going to increase. The threats are still going to increase. And we need to ensure that we're balancing all of that from a leadership perspective. So I touched a little bit on how security can help accelerate the business objectives. And it's not always something major to think about. So if you look at, say, authentication and how authentication has changed over the years, today you can implement some very strong authentication mechanisms in your application that are also much more user-friendly. And so by combining that, you're getting both a more secure application or implementation, but you're also improving the user experience for your customers and able to use that as a selling point, competitive advantage. Similarly, from a digital transformation, if you're looking to move workloads or applications into cloud environments, you can very readily create a highly secure, very easily secure environments in the cloud and be able to do that and replicate it with security as code and make that highly repeatable, highly scalable, and do most of that with native cloud security services that you're able to get through the marketplaces. Another topic is tying it to it being a business objective is also from a risk perspective. Often security is bundled under a general technology risk. It's generally, then technology is bundled under an operational risk. So you have it 4 layers down from a risk perspective. When we're seeing the impacts of security issues, the potential security issues on business and revenue impacts, is really looking at cybersecurity or security issues for your organization as an enterprise top-level risk, and having those conversations at the Chief Risk Officer Risk Committee with the board. A lot of discussions happening with the board, but how are you balancing those discussions with the business objectives and understanding the potential impacts that could happen to those business objectives? A key area I see a lot of folks focusing on is a business crisis plan. So we all know our incident response plans. We know what's going to happen. We'll take our image. We'll do our forensics investigation. We have our incident response teams. But more and more, what is that business response? If there's an impact to revenue because a site's down, a process isn't working, you're not able to get this, what is that? Who makes decisions on who can make communications to the press, to key customers? What are you going to do? What are your backup plans? So it's not your traditional kind of disaster recovery, business resilience, business continuity. It's a part of that and really owning and preparing for that message. So we talked a lot about over the years, you're going to have security events, so be prepared, practice, do your tabletop exercises. We need to do the same thing at the business level. If you have an event, you're not able to do this, what do you do? How do you tie into it? How do your integrations, how do your partners impact that? And practice that and have the playbooks so you're ready when that type of event happens. And then lastly here, establish a culture where security is everyone's responsibility. I've lost track of how many organizations I've worked with where anywhere in the organization, if someone said, oh, that's a security issue, like, oh, the information security team is going to cover that. We can't operate that way today with social engineering, phishing. Every person, every individual in an organization is a potential entry point. And so it's ensuring that everyone understands their role. Need to sing a song if you were here for the awareness presentation. Bring the awareness together. I love that. I'm going to take that back. But then, not just from an awareness perspective, in their day-to-day activities, data protection, what are the requirements? How do they tie that in? Making sure that it's integrated into the business processes that they have defined. And fundamentally, kind of the core of the message that I have today is to be successful going forward in this environment, we need to change the mindset in how we're approaching security. So I talked about the localization of data needing to stay in country in many and an increasing number of locations. Continued increase in threats, types of threats, continued increase in attack surface, complexity. So first, how do you understand what your environment looks like? Asset management, threat landscape has always been a challenge, so we just make it harder. And we create more devices and we create more attack surface points. So how do you understand that? You've got everyone wandering around with a phone. What does that mean for your organization as well? So ensure that you have that visibility, not just an inventory, but really mapping out and understanding where are those integration points? Where are those points where you're integrating with, whether it's a supplier or another service from a technology perspective, and making sure that you've got those components tied down as well. And then baseline your activity. So historically, when we're looking at monitoring, we're getting our indicators of compromise from a threat perspective, and we are identifying that these are the things I don't want to see in my environment. So when you see them, generate an alert, and we need to go take a look and see what's going on. That's not going to scale in today's world with the rate of threats that they're increasing. We're not, one, going to be able to anticipate everything that's going to happen, but we're also just not going to be able to, as fast as possible, identify all the detections that we need to put in place. So we need to flip our mindset and really take a complete 180. Instead of looking for the known bad things in our environment, looking at the baseline. What is the normal behavior of our system? What is the normal behavior of the communications? And then tie that into anomalous activities that you then see. Investigate those. You can do so system to system, and then starting to do it entity. So whether it's a workload, a device, a user, API keys, really understanding what they are doing, and then flag and investigate when they do something that's out of norm. And it could just be a process change. It's now going to talk to the system instead of the system. Great. Or it could have been an employee was social engineered, gain access to the system, and now you have an attacker with some lateral movement east to west through your organization. Minimizing silos. Many organizations that I talk to, the organizations as a whole operate in silos. But more critically, the security teams operate in silos. The vulnerability management team does their thing over here. The network security team does their thing over here. The application security team does their thing over here. And none of that is combined, none of that is aggregated to provide a global picture of what is happening. So you have a highly complex threat environment, you have an incredibly complex attack surface, and you're still operating in silos to where you're not giving yourself that global visibility and understanding what's happening in your environment with all of the integrations that are driven by the digitalization and all the pieces that we talked about earlier. Shifting from defensive to proactive. This ties into the anomalous behavior and being able to understand what is happening from an activity perspective, but also changing the mindset and just how you're thinking about your security, I'd say, architecture, knowing that this change is coming, knowing that things are going to continue to evolve. How do you best identify and architect with zero trust is a good example in the prior panel of understanding how to tag your environment, understanding how to identify those key choke points, and be proactive in creating an architecture that really highlights the security and makes that top priority. I mentioned before, if you're having the digital transformation activities and moving into a cloud environment, doing that day one, the cloud providers make that very, very easy for you to be able to create a secure environment. And then a global perspective for global threats. So removing the silos, both from an organizational perspective, from a security perspective, when you have to have data staying in different geographic locations, ensuring that you have the ability to bring all of that data up in some type of aggregated way, while continuing to adhere to all regulations and requirements that you need to follow, and look much more globally at what's happening in your environment. Because you may have a company in Sweden with another subsidiary in Switzerland and manufacturers all over the globe. How do you understand what's happening between those interactions and ensuring that someone in your supplier space isn't being a source? So we've seen before that the supply chain being the target for attacks. And supply chain, yes, from a software perspective, but supply chain also from a vendor perspective, and finding the weakest link from a vendor perspective. And so ensuring that what's your approach for preventing access? We do our checklists, we do our due diligence, which is fine, but we're still all human. We're going to make mistakes. Social engineering will be a success at some point in time. And how do you ensure going into that if something happens, or I shouldn't say if, when something happens, the ability to create some type of negative harm in your environment is as small as it can be. And that's where we look at things like zero trust and minimizing access and communication points. Skill shortage is something that we continue to talk about, embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that really focusing on different skill sets, different perspectives, different backgrounds. In my past, I've hired folks that have been credit card fraud analysts, didn't know anything specifically about security, but really understood fraud and behavior. Marketing folks for awareness. I'm also building pipelines of folks either wanting to get into the industry or recent university grads that are just really hungry and want to get in. So if you still had any question on the rate of change and if it's increasing, this is a chart that shows how do you, for Spotify, Instagram, and ChatGPT, how long it took them to get to 1 million users. And if you tie that out to 100 million users, ChatGPT is still pretty much a straight line compared to the others. So in conclusion, the pace of change has never been this fast, and it will never be this slow again. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Please visit Elastic in the Expo Center. I'll be down there if you have any questions.